Welcome to Royal Storyline UK, where we uncover the biggest royal stories, palace drama, and the latest developments surrounding the British royal family. From King Charles and Prince William to Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and the rest of the monarchy, we bring you the stories making headlines and the moments everyone is talking about. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Royal Storyline UK and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest royal updates. If you enjoy this video, please leave a like. It really helps support the channel. And before we get started, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's royal story. For the moment, returning my loved ones to Britain is not feasible. The only chance I have to set foot on British soil again is when something truly significant demands my presence. That thought lingered like a bruise as a decision, cold, procedural, and final, moved through Buckingham Palace. It arrived without hesitation, softened by nothing, hidden behind no diplomatic phrasing. In a sealed chamber, King Charles laid a parchment before Prince William. William read the closing passage once, then again, as if the ink might rearrange itself into a gentler meaning. It didn't. Within minutes, father and eldest son had endorsed the most crushing royal measure taken against Prince Harry since his departure, the removal of his *HRH style from active royal use *. Not a tabloid punishment, not a family scolding, a coordinated instruction to the entire royal household to stop treating him as a functioning senior representative of the crown. The crown was no longer merely creating distance. It was drawing a boundary with the force of a seal pressed into hot wax. Two counselors stood witness as Charles reviewed the directive. The document was written in careful, constitutional language, so careful it felt brutal. It instructed the royal household to erase HRH from active files, official letters, ceremonial procedure, internal directories, diplomatic references, and future palace acknowledgments. Not a private request, a palace-wide order. William kept his eyes on the final sheet. There was no triumph in him. The future sovereign looked like a man forcing himself to swallow a stone. He told his father that ambiguity had become harm. It eroded discipline. It created inconsistency. Some offices still used the style, others didn't. Some invitations granted old precedents, others reduced Harry to a guest. The wobble weakened authority, and it encouraged Harry to keep pulling on threads until something tore. Charles listened without speaking. His quill hovered above his younger son's name. Obligation demanded action. Affection begged for patience. William spoke once more, his voice lower now, almost pleading. We can't shield a status he claims while rejecting the obligations tied to it. Charles's eyes flicked up. You think this ends it? I think it ends the uncertainty, William said, and the uncertainty is what's killing us. A secret provision sat within the papers. Harry would be notified before any public declaration. One opportunity to respond privately. One last chance to avoid a constitutional spectacle and a public crisis about the monarchy's authority. Beside the directive lay a sealed enclosure dated to a recent royal function. It contained the confrontation that persuaded Charles and William that compromise had collapsed. Neither man reopened it. They did not need to. The memory already lived behind their ribs. Charles removed his spectacles, set them down, and asked the question that did not belong to a king. Once this is executed, he said, can we ever summon him home? William waited, then answered with the honesty Charles both needed and feared. Not as matters once stood. The king signed. One counselor collected the papers and moved toward the door. William watched the sealed enclosure leave the chamber, as if he were watching a piece of his childhood carried away in silence. Yet before any document could define the story, the people beneath the titles had to be understood. 3 men, father, heir, and son, each about to surrender something no decree could restore. Long before the signatures, binders, and urgent meetings, This had been a family rotting under unresolved grief and public pressure. Charles remembered the boy who once reached for his hand during engagements. William remembered the brother who stood beside him when the world fell apart. Harry remembered standing behind them both, convinced duty always extracted more from him than it ever gave back. Now those memories crashed against the machinery of monarchy. At Windsor, Charles sat alone with an old photograph in his hand, William and Harry grinning beside their father in a time before suspicion had hardened every exchange. Camilla entered quietly and didn't try to take it from him. She stood close enough to share the silence. "It feels like defeat," Charles admitted, voice rough. "Not correction, defeat." He had hoped distance would soften rage. Instead, every attempted reconciliation seemed to provoke another accusation, another demand, another wound displayed to the world. Camilla told him affection could remain even when confidence had crumbled. Charles didn't answer. The problem wasn't whether he loved Harry. The problem was whether love could safely steer an institution built on stability and symbol. William carried the same weight into his own quarters. Catherine watched him dress for the final review and asked if he was sure. William exhaled, long and tired. "Certainty disappeared years ago," he said. "All that's left is duty and the future." The future mattered. Unresolved conflict weakened royal authority. Another public clash between the brothers could stain the institution their children would one day inherit. William didn't want to be the man who won. He wanted to be the man who prevented the crown from bleeding out through 1,000 cuts. Harry felt the shift before anyone explained it. An encrypted message arrived requesting his availability for an urgent palace call. It was secure, formal, and stripped of Charles's familiar phrasing. Harry read it twice. Then he asked Meghan, half bitter, half wary, "Are they about to make an example of me?" Meghan studied the sender details and saw what he missed. The request did not originate from the king's personal office. It was authorized through a joint channel controlled by Charles and William. Father and brother were no longer negotiating separately. They had become a single front. Harry placed the device face down on the kitchen counter. For a moment he said nothing. Then, quiet as if speaking too loudly might make it real, he said, "They've finally picked each other over me." The words dragged him back to the function named in the sealed enclosure, the day the final rupture formed. It hadn't begun with a televised interview. It hadn't begun with a headline or a rumor. It began after a remembrance service at St. Paul's Cathedral, when the cameras turned away, and the family believed the hardest part of the day was over. Behind the cathedral, Harry walked into a narrow private vestry and closed the door. The room smelled of old stone and incense. The air felt too still, as if even the building were waiting. William was there first. The prince's expression was controlled, but his eyes had the guarded look of a man entering a room where he expects a trap. Harry did not waste time. He demanded the restoration of his HRH styling, his ceremonial precedence, and the security privileges he believed were being stripped by stealth. He wanted it done before the next major royal event. He wanted it done officially. The day's public program had already told him what the palace thought. He had no formal role, stood outside the senior procession, and HRH was absent beside his name. The omission felt like a public slap delivered with polite gloves. William kept his voice level. "You don't recover privileges through pressure." Harry's laugh held no humor. "So I'm royal when you want a picture, but not royal when I ask for what I'm owed." "You're not owed working status," William replied. "You chose to leave the work." Harry stepped closer. "No, you chose to erase me." The argument sharpened quickly, not because either man wanted drama, but because they were speaking through years of resentment. Harry accused William of using protocol as a personal weapon. William said Harry had turned private pain into public leverage, making every conversation feel like it could be sold, quoted, or weaponized if the outcome wasn't favorable. Charles entered before the brothers crossed a point that could not be walked back. The king's face changed the moment he understood the temperature of the room. Harry's words came out clean and merciless. If the palace did not reverse the restrictions, he would publicly challenge its authority to limit his title. Heartbreak crossed Charles's features before anger arrived. "Stop," Charles said, not loudly, but with the command of a man who has spent a lifetime being obeyed. "Speak as my son, not as my opponent." Harry reached inside his coat and produced a prepared statement. The top line included the style, HRH***. He said it would be released within 48 hours if the palace refused. Charles held out his hand. "Give it to me." Harry folded the paper instead, refusing to surrender it. "Private conversations never protected me." William moved a chair away from the door, planted himself between Harry and the exit, and said, "Do not threaten our father with the title he gave you." Harry's eyes flashed, but he didn't answer. He brushed past and left. Charles remained seated, staring at the closed door. William understood in that moment that reconciliation had just been reframed into surrender. If the crown gave in now, the precedent would live forever: threaten publicly, gain privately. The cathedral confrontation created the wound. The next meeting tore it open. This time it was a private sitting room at Windsor. No aides, no secretaries, no staged language. Charles sat at one end of a narrow table. William stood near the window. Between them lay the unsigned revocation papers, waiting like a verdict that had not yet been read aloud. Harry entered. The room did not greet him with warmth or hostility, only silence. Charles asked one final question. Would Harry withdraw the ultimatum and accept a private path back, or force the crown to answer him publicly? Harry refused. He said the palace had made him a prince only when useful and an outsider when inconvenient. Charles replied that he could not reject duty while demanding the protection and recognition attached to duty. William stepped forward. "Every offer becomes a loyalty test," he said. "Every boundary becomes an insult, and every conversation carries the threat that you'll punish us publicly if you don't get your way." Harry fired back. "You confuse loyalty to family with obedience to the machine you're inheriting." Charles opened another folder, a palace briefing. Officials had obtained a second draft of Harry's statement, harsher, more personal. It accused William of manipulating the king, isolating him from his younger son, and using royal protocol to settle a score. Harry's anger wavered into alarm. Someone close to him had shared the draft. The room changed. Now it wasn't only misunderstanding and grief. Now betrayal sat on the table with them. Harry pushed the revocation papers away and stood. William's hand came down firmly on the document. "Sit down," William said. "This is the last conversation before the decision becomes history." Harry stayed standing. Charles lowered his gaze and signed the first page. The sound of pen on paper was small, but it landed like a door being locked. Harry watched the ink dry and asked, voice sharp, "So William controls you now?" Charles looked directly at him. "The authority remains mine," he said, "but the consequences will belong to the man who inherits what I'm trying to protect." That was the deeper reality Harry had resisted. The crown was already shifting, slowly and inevitably, toward William. The signature belonged to Charles, but the architecture belonged to the heir: long-term planning, branding, discipline, and boundaries. Harry's status became the first crisis where father and son acted not as king and advisor, but as two generations of the crown speaking with one voice. After Harry left, Charles remained alone, asking his private secretary whether history would remember him as the king who rejected his own child. The aide gave him logic, not comfort. History might remember the moment he stopped letting private guilt govern public duty. William found no relief either. Catherine later found him rereading lines of Harry's draft statement, as if studying it could. change what it meant. He told her every sentence sounded like Harry speaking to the world rather than to the brother standing in front of him. Then the machinery began to move. Constitutional advisors explained the reach of the action. Removing active HRH recognition would immediately reshape invitations, seating order, ceremonial lists, correspondence, and diplomatic protocols. It would prevent royal offices from quietly using the style out of habit or sympathy. A second instruction required every department to update the wording at the same time. No delays, no loopholes, no mistakes that could keep the old status alive. Charles read the final order himself, then carried it into the last review room. He placed it before William and said, "I authorize this as king. You must live with it as his brother." William signed the acknowledgement without lifting his eyes. One sealed copy was sent to Harry before the public statement. The envelope contained no personal letter, no handwritten note, no warmth, only formal notice, revised protocol, and a final sentence confirming that the HRH style would no longer be recognized in active royal use. Harry read that sentence twice, then a third time. The words did not change, but his expression did, from disbelief to anger to the stunned stillness of someone realizing a door had closed behind him. The notice clarified that he remained a prince by birth, but the palace would not use His Royal Highness in official, ceremonial, or representative settings. It was not a rewriting of DNA. It was a severing of function. A paragraph near the bottom sharpened the threat. Any future use of HRH for commercial work or public representation would be met with formal palace correction. They would contradict it openly. They would enforce the boundary. Then, as if to prove how coordinated the operation was, a charity invitation arrived with Harry's name already revised. The change was everywhere before he had even finished reading. Harry looked at Meghan and said, "He reduced us to administrative language." Meghan warned him not to answer in anger, not because she excused what had happened, but because she understood the trap. An explosive public response would confirm every palace accusation that he relied on pressure when private talks failed. Harry did what the palace expected for one moment. He reached for the furious response he had drafted after the cathedral confrontation. The pages were there, ready to ignite, but he stopped. Instead, he asked for a private call with William alone. Not to negotiate the letters back. The order was final. He wanted to know whether anything remained between them once the title was gone. William closed the door to his private study and dismissed every aide. For once there was no script. The call began without greetings. "Did you want this?" Harry asked. William answered immediately, but not simply. "I wanted it to end," he said. "I never wanted the ending to look like this." Harry accused William of hiding behind duty because the truth was harder. William said trust hadn't been destroyed by departure alone. It had been broken each time a private conversation seemed to carry the threat of becoming public ammunition. Harry replied, bitter, "Silence protects everyone except me." William didn't argue at once. He admitted certain dates still brought Harry to mind, especially those connected to their mother. The confession softened something in Harry's chest, despite his anger. Then William said the line that landed hardest. "I didn't forget who stood beside me," he said. "I stopped knowing who would speak afterward." Harry lowered his voice. He admitted the cathedral ultimatum had been partly theater. He wanted the palace to believe he would release it because fear seemed like the only language William still responded to. It didn't excuse the threat, but it exposed the desperation beneath it. William revealed something Harry had not known. Charles had resisted the revocation longer than the palace expected. The king had argued for one more pause, one more private offer, one more attempt to separate the son from the crisis. Harry's threat to challenge his father publicly, more than William's anger, had ended the hesitation. Harry stared at the furious response pages. Then slowly, he tore them in half. William heard the rip through the phone and said nothing. "I won't fight you for the letters," Harry said. William promised the palace statement would address status without attacking Harry's character. That restraint would shape whether the public saw punishment, protection, or the final collapse of a royal family. They ended the call without forgiveness, but also without war. By sunrise, private grief became global spectacle. News banners carried Harry's name. Commentators argued over constitutional meaning. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace. One newspaper front page showed Charles and William side by side under the headline, "The Crown Closes the Door." Buckingham Palace released a brief statement confirming that Harry's HRH style would no longer be recognized in active royal protocol. No mention of the cathedral confrontation, no personal criticism, no explanation beyond clarity and consistency. The restraint made it feel final. The world waited for Harry's retaliation. Hours passed. No interview, no lawsuit, no public ultimatum. Harry's silence became the day's surprise, bending the story away from open war and into irreversible acceptance. Outside the palace gates, an elderly man placed two photographs against the railings, one of the brothers walking together as boys, and one of them standing apart as adults. People gathered quietly around the images, as if drawn to a tragedy they couldn't name but understood anyway. Charles watched the morning coverage alone until a commentator described him as a father rejecting his son. He turned off the television at once. Camilla entered and found him staring at the blank screen. "The statement attacked no one," she said gently. "It doesn't make the loss lighter," Charles replied. William watched old footage of Harry beside him in happier years and briefly questioned whether the palace wording sounded too final. Catherine reminded him the separation hadn't been created in a day. It had existed for years, unnamed and bleeding beneath the surface. "You didn't make it," she said. "You finally stopped pretending it wasn't there." By evening, Charles received confirmation. Harry would not legally or publicly challenge the order. The crown had secured its boundary. But there was no celebration inside Windsor. Authority was preserved, yet the father inside Charles still felt the missing weight of a son who had once fit naturally into the family's shape. The order took permanent effect across correspondence, ceremonial planning, official representation, and palace protocol. Every department had changed the styling at the same hour, proof the decision had been prepared long before Harry touched the envelope. Charles read the final implementation report and closed it without satisfaction. He opened a drawer where Harry's childhood photograph rested untouched. Removing royal recognition had not removed paternal love. It had only forced the monarch to accept that affection could survive even when trust could not. William admitted to Catherine that he had protected the future crown, but lost the last belief that he and Harry might ever return to being brothers without suspicion. Catherine answered that truth was often less comforting than hope, but far more stable. In California, Harry did not tear the official order apart. He folded it and placed it in a locked drawer. Meghan watched him do it, recognizing the difference between surrender and acceptance. "I'll build my future without asking them to confirm who I am," Harry said. Acceptance did not mean defeat. It meant stepping forward without expecting royal symbols to follow. Charles and William met one final time in the office where the directive had first been approved. The king asked a question that belonged to the crown. "Is the monarchy safer?" William answered yes. Then Charles asked the question that belonged to a father. "And is the family healed?" William's reply was quiet, no. Neither man tried to soften it. The revocation ended Harry's suspended life between royal privilege and royal separation. Charles chose the crown over continued uncertainty. William accepted the burden of enforcing that choice. Harry stepped outside the institution without demanding its authority accompany him. This moment did not prove duty defeated love. It proved love without trust could no longer govern a monarchy. The crown moved forward, stable, protected, and permanently scarred.